Never take food. From Stranger Stories sent in by Cristina. It was one of those quiet nights, just me and my husband Mike, watching YouTube videos, when he shared a story that sent chills down my spine. What started as a childhood memory unraveled into a disturbing web of events that haunted several families in Providence. Mike was 8 years old, living in an old brick building in Providence, Rhode Island. One of those classic red brick buildings full of history in every crack. On the third floor lived Mrs. Peterson, a woman whose overly sweet kindness made everyone uncomfortable. She was known for her orange cakes, which smelled irresistible and had a flavor no one could ever replicate. That smell still haunts everyone who lived in that building. The Thompsons lived in 4B. Emily, their youngest, loved Mrs. Peterson's cakes. Every Sunday after church, Emily would get a slice. First, Emily started losing weight slowly, then rapidly. The doctors said anemia. 2 weeks later, pneumonia. By the end of the month, the Thompsons had moved to Vermont. Emily didn't make it there. Then came the Walkers in 2A. Their son Billy had asthma. Mrs. Peterson would leave slices of her cake at their door saying, "Good for the lungs." Billy spent 3 months in the hospital before his family decided to move back to Boston. One seemingly normal day, Mrs. Peterson offered Mike a slice. Excited, orange was his favorite, he ran inside to share it with his mom, Melissa. But as soon as she saw the cake, she threw it in the trash. Mike was furious, but what Melissa told him next changed everything. Melissa sat him down on their old couch and told him about Beth, his grandmother. In the 1970s, back in Salem, Beth mysteriously started wasting away. That's when they uncovered Cheryl, a cousin who had wanted Beth's husband for herself. Melissa spoke of poisoned food, blessed pins, and Cheryl's desperate escape. But she didn't stop there. Melissa told Mike about Rebecca Martinez in 5C, who had accepted a brownie from Mrs. Peterson just the week before. Rebecca was now hospitalized with unknown causes. About how Mr. Jenkins, the building's janitor, had found strange marks under the carpets of every apartment where children had lived. About the chanting sounds that came from 3A during new moons. Those marks are still there, buried under layers of paint and fresh carpet. After that talk, Mike never accepted anything from Mrs. Peterson again. One day, she simply disappeared. When the janitor went to clean out her apartment, he found an old chest. Inside were black candles, herbs, and a recipe book. Each page had a photo. Emily Thompson, Billy Walker, Rebecca Martinez, with a red X over certain faces. The chest sat on the curb for weeks. People swore they could hear whispers coming from it at night. A new family moved into 3A with a young daughter named Sarah. Melissa tried to warn them about taking food from strangers. But one October afternoon, Sarah came home with a cupcake. "The new lady in 5B made it," she said. "Sarah has been in a coma for 3 months now. Doctors still don't know why. These days, Mike won't even take cookies from neighbors at Christmas. Our son just turned 8, the same age Mike was back then. Yesterday, he brought home a cupcake. The new neighbor made it, Mom. It tastes like orange. And that smell, it's exactly like Mrs. Peterson's cakes. Because evil doesn't die, it just changes shape and moves to a new address." Last week, an older woman moved into the apartment next door. Mike says she has the same sweet smile as Mrs. Peterson. And yesterday I smelled orange cake in the hallway. The night shift. I work at the Food Lion in Millbrook, Delaware, one of those stores set up in places where no other chain wants to be. You know the kind of place you drive by and think, how is that still open? Yeah, that's where I spend my nights. Since COVID hit our small town, business has slowed to a crawl. Some days we barely get 10 customers. The parking lot is practically a graveyard for abandoned shopping carts, and our massive stockroom, big enough to handle the load of a much busier store, has become eerily empty and silent. And the silence? It's heavy. It's present. It all started on a Tuesday in October. I was disinfecting carts with Lysol, COVID protocols, you know how it goes, when I decided to take a bathroom break. Our store has that typical American supermarket layout, public restrooms at the back, connected by a mirrored hallway that looks like something straight out of an 80s horror movie. I was washing my hands when I saw him in the mirror, a tall man in an impeccable suit entering the men's restroom. The strange thing? I didn't hear the door open, didn't hear his footsteps on the floor. Sometimes I wonder if that was the first time I saw him, or if he'd been watching me all along. I went back to stash my cleaning supplies in Janine's locker. She's our night shift cashier. That's when I heard it, the sound of a toilet flushing. But when I checked, the restroom was empty. Every stall door was open, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Kevin, our security guard who's usually glued to his phone watching shorts, swore nobody else had entered the store. 2 days later, I was heading home after a late shift. Millbrook's the kind of town where everything shuts down by 9 p.m., except maybe the Waffle House and a Walgreens. The streets were deserted. Not even the usual college kids from Delaware State hanging out at Buffalo Wild Wings were around. And then I heard it, the crunch of autumn leaves behind me. About 50 meters back, I saw a shadow moving between two burnt-out streetlights. Thanks, Millbrook City Council. I kept walking, my sneakers scuffing against the dry leaves, when the figure darted, completely soundlessly, behind a parked Dodge Ram. But when I reached it, no one was there. The silence of those footsteps haunts me more than any sound ever could. At my apartment building, the elevator started acting up, opening and closing randomly, as if someone was playing with the sensors. Every night on my way home, I'd hear footsteps behind me. Then, last week, I was looking for Tyler in the delivery section. You know those PVC curtains that separate the stockroom? I was passing through them when I saw him. A tall figure in a white coat, stepping out of the bakery. Our eyes locked for a second. Then he took 2 steps back and disappeared. Tyler swore the bakery was empty. Jenny, our baker, had left hours earlier. The weirdest part, the footsteps stopped after that. But now, there's something else. Even when I'm home watching The Office reruns, I don't feel alone anymore. And the strange thing? It's not a bad feeling. It's almost like having a silent roommate. A very, very quiet one. Last night, as I was wrapping up my shift, the lights in the hallway by the bathrooms flickered. In the mirror, for just a second, I saw him. The man in the suit, smiling at me. It wasn't a threatening smile. It felt more like recognition. Because sometimes loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about who chooses to stay with you. And late at night, walking home through Millbrook's silent streets, I don't feel scared of the dark anymore. After all, I'm never really alone. Though sometimes I wonder, did I choose him as my company? Or did he choose me, the night visitor? March began with Jenny flying to Portland to care for her mom, who'd had a bad fall. Our house in Medford, Oregon felt unnervingly quiet. Just me and Buddy, our golden retriever we rescued from the Southern Oregon Humane Society last year. The first day alone was uneventful. I sat through a few Zoom meetings, cleaned up the house, and ran some errands. That night, after a quick FaceTime call with Jenny, I took my meds and went to bed. Buddy, breaking his usual routine, refused to come into the bedroom. He just sat in the hallway, staring intently at our bed. Sometimes I wonder, did he already know what was coming? It was around 2:45 a.m. when it happened. You know that feeling, like you're being watched, like the air in the room gets heavier, denser. First came the weight on the bed, that familiar pressure, like when Buddy jumps up to sleep with us. But the door was closed, and I could hear him breathing outside with that restless whine dogs make when they're uneasy. "Calm down, my boy." The voice was like old paper tearing, rough, ancient. My eyes snapped open to the dim glow of my phone screen illuminating the room. That voice. It called Buddy, by the name only our family used, and then I saw her. In the corner of the room between the dresser and the reading chair stood an old woman. Her gray hair cascaded like a curtain down her back, and she wore a dress that looked like it had been buried and dug up more than once, a shade of gray you don't see in modern clothes. The room turned icy. Not the artificial chill of AC, but a deep, bone-chilling cold. My breath fogged in the air as though it were the dead of winter instead of early spring. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She just stood there, watching me with eyes that had seen generations rise and fall. Her eyes, they were the same gray as her dress, filled with centuries of stories. Then she smiled, not the comforting smile of a grandmother, but something ancient and knowing, like she understood a truth about me that even I didn't know. And then she was gone, vanished between one blink and the next. My hands were shaking as I texted Jenny. I didn't tell her about the visitor. She had enough to worry about with her mom in the hospital. Instead, we talked about mundane things. The weather in Portland, whether I'd fed Buddy, if I'd taken my meds. When Jenny came home the next morning, I told her everything. She called a priest to bless the house with holy water. The scent of incense still lingers in the bedroom even months later. We never figured out who or what that woman was. But a few weeks after, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old photo in a box we'd never unpacked. It was of the house's previous owner, who had passed away in 1963. She was wearing a gray dress. Buddy still won't come into our room. Every night, around 2:45, he sits in the hallway staring at the corner between the dresser and the chair. And sometimes, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I feel a gentle touch on my head and hear a faint whisper. Calm down, my boy. Because some visitors never really leave. They just learn to wait for the right moment.